Welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have a packed show, so we've got to get into it because we've got a lot to cover. We're going to start off with what is going on in Gaza. Of course, this is just top of the news. Apparently, Israel's main target in Gaza is a hospital after all. So remember when there was the whole fiasco about the failed rocket that may or may not have hit a hospital, that was may or may not have been a failed rocket. We never really got to the bottom of what actually happened there. There was a lot of conflicting reports. What we do know is that the evidence that Israel put forward of a failed rocket was debunked by numerous independent experts. They viewed the video. They were able to geolocate where this rocket came from. They said that rocket came from Israel. It failed, but it didn't fail over the hospital. So that wasn't it. It had nothing to do with the hospital. But there's a lot of questions about what actually happened, who bombed the hospital that killed all of the people earlier on in the conflict. And a lot of the screaming was from those who were defending Israel was how they would never target a hospital. Why would you even think that? You were nuts for even believing that they would target a hospital. You fell for it. You fell for Hamas propaganda is what they claimed. Well, now it is confirmed. Israel is targeting hospitals. They are saying it flat out. They're, of course, giving their excuses. But according to numerous news outlets who are on the ground there and who've been talking directly to the IDF, they say that their main military target in Gaza right now is a hospital. That's their main chief military target. Here's the Reuters article. Israeli tanks outside Gaza hospital. Biden hopes for less intrusive action. This title has changed a couple of times throughout the day. By the way, it started off more dire, saying that this was their chief target. But it says this in the article. Israeli tanks took up position at the gates of Gaza City's main hospital on Monday, the chief target in Israel's battle to seize control of the northern half of the Gaza Strip, and where medics said patients, including newborns, were dying for lack of fuel. Gaza Health Ministry spokesperson who was inside Al-Shifa Hospital. So there's several hospitals that are being targeted. Al-Shifa is the largest hospital in Gaza. Al-Quds is another large hospital that's being targeted, and there's other smaller hospitals being targeted. But so it's not just one hospital, it's many hospitals that are targeted. But right now, they've got their sights set on a couple of the biggest ones, actually, the biggest ones, so not small ones. So the Gaza Health Ministry spokesperson who was inside Al-Shifa Hospital said 32 patients had died in the last 3 days, including 3 newborn babies as a result of the siege of the hospital and lack of power. At least 650 patients were still inside, desperate to be evacuated to another medical facility. Israel says the hospital sits atop tunnels, housing a headquarters for Hamas fighters, using patients as shields, which Hamas denies. We're going to keep reading this article and another one from BBC, but we will play the video that IDF gave. And what they claim, again, whatever they claim, you have to scrutinize because it's often found to be a lie. And this is what's absurd. It's as if they don't realize people have the internet or people can see what they're showing and can debunk it very quickly and very rapidly. And so much of what Israel has come out with, and this is what's so difficult about this conflict, is that many people would love to be able to side with Israel. Many people would love to believe that the atrocities and the mass amount of civilian casualties really are truly just unfortunate, but what has to happen because Hamas is really truly using these people as human shields. The problem is that when the IDF starts showing evidence, the evidence is not actual evidence. So the video we're going to show you, when they claim it's a tunnel, it's clearly an elevator shaft. I mean, it's just, they'll say, oh, believe us because we're telling you this is what it is. Just believe us. We told you it's a failed rocket. Here's the video of the failed rocket. Not realizing a bunch of experts, even experts who would typically be on the side of Israel, come out and saying, well, actually, we geolocated that thing and that's not the rocket. That rocket came from Israel. If it failed and it didn't even hit the hospital. I mean, just everything that they've said at this point, almost everything. I don't want to say everything because I'm sure they've said some things that are true, but a lot of what they've said has been debunked, and we're going to debunk some again tonight. They go on to say the tanks, this is from a surgeon inside the hospital saying, the tanks are in front of the hospital. We are under full blockade. It is a totally civilian area. Only hospital patients, doctors, and other civilians staying in the hospital. Someone should stop this. They bombed the water tanks. They bombed the water wells. They bombed the oxygen pump as well. They bombed everything in the hospital. So we are hardly surviving. And why would you bomb the water and the oxygen for hospital patients? You look, even if Hamas is headquartered underneath the hospital, even if there are tunnels underneath there and a bunch of weapons, what is the point of bombing the water and the oxygen for the civilian patients that you know are inside that hospital needing the hospital services? What would be the point of that? BBC goes on to also report on this, and they've said that the World Health Organization says, first of all, their headline, a little bit more accurate here, Gaza hospitals caught on front line of Israel-Hamas war. The World Health Organization says 36 health facilities, including 22 hospitals, have been damaged since the war began, and only a handful are now still operational. The WHO said on Sunday that Al-Shifa in Gaza City, the territory's largest with 700 beds, had ceased to function and that the situation inside was dire and perilous. Israel says Hamas fighters operate in tunnels underneath the hospital, a claim which Hamas denies. The other thing is Israel's now on the ground. It's one thing when prior to Israel actually being on the ground and they were surrounding Gaza, but they weren't in Gaza. And so they would drop bombs and they'd say, well, we've got to collapse the tunnels. They're now on the ground. They're surrounding the hospital. They could smoke them out. I mean, don't tell me you can't smoke them out of those tunnels in a variety of different ways. Whether you use smoke, whether you use water, whether, of course, no one's going to go into the tunnels. I don't think any soldiers, I don't think that would ever be something that anybody, that would be a good military strategy is to go enter the tunnels, but they could certainly do other things. They could block off the entrances. I mean, they know where these tunnels are and they're there on the ground now. So why do you have to bomb the water tanks that are on top of the building? Those water tanks are not sitting on the ground. The water tanks in Palestine are on top of the buildings. They put them on top so that the water can run down through the building. There's no need to bomb the water tanks on top of the building. So the WHO director said constant gunfire and bombings in the area have exacerbated the already critical circumstances. Multiple reports from inside said there's no food, no fuel to run generators. Solar energy is being used to power a few critical systems until they get bombed. There have been communication blackouts. The Doctors Without Borders charity was unable to contact its members inside Gaza over the weekend. Attempts by BBC to contact workers have also been unsuccessful. Staff said that 3 of the 39 infants in their care died over the weekend due to there being no incubators. Surviving babies were at serious risk of death, according to the doctors. Now, I want to point this out that online on social media, there was a lot of claims that 39 babies had died because they couldn't be in the incubators because of Israel. It was very much similar to the 40 beheaded babies claim. This was maybe it was rooted in some sort of truth. They got the number from somewhere. Maybe it was 40 babies were, I'm not 100% sure where that one came from, but the 39 babies it was circulating online that they had died. They haven't died. They're close to death. 3 of them have died. They have been taken out of the incubators. The doctors have put the babies all next to one another in order to keep them warm, to try to have them feed off of each other's body heat because they can no longer be in the incubators. The incubators aren't any good for them. 3 of them have died. And the others are, the other 36 are barely surviving, and they could potentially die if they don't get evacuated out of there. Israel says it knows with certainty. So this is where we're going to get into some of the claims, okay? Because Israel says it knows with certainty that there's a Hamas command center beneath Shifa. And they gave us this video. This is from Netanyahu. He tweeted this video out. His tweet says, Hamas ISIS is sick. So he's claiming that for one, Hamas is ISIS. By the way, Hamas fights ISIS inside of Gaza, but Hamas regularly goes after other terrorist cells inside of Gaza. But says Hamas ISIS is sick. They turn hospitals into headquarters for their terror. We just released intelligence proving it. Here's the video. And then watch this video. I mean, look at this. This is the proof. This is the type of stuff that people look at and they say, are you kidding me? I mean, how stupid do you think people are? You're showing us drawings. This is like a cartoon, illustrations. So now you're showing us the satellite imagery of Shifa Hospital. Okay, I see a hospital. I don't see any tunnels. I don't see any Hamas. Okay, there's the layout of the hospital. You're telling me in the red that there's a Hamas underground complex there without any evidence other, just telling me that's where they are. Okay, you could say these are anywhere. I mean, you could claim these are in my house for all this shows. So they're saying, oh, look this is the evidence. This is what Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, brings out as evidence. I mean, this is ridiculous. Anybody could make this up. Anybody could say, well, geez, the terrorist cells are just everywhere. I mean, if this is the standard of proof, how many people in America would love to use this as a standard of proof? Think about all of the leftists or the liberals over the last, since 2016, who would love to be able to say, we swear there are MAGA bunkers. There are MAGA bunkers all over the United States. We have proof. Here's the proof. And they do 3D drawings and they put red outlines on Google Maps. And they tell you this is where the MAGA bunkers are. We have to go after them. We have to stop the terrorists. I mean, if this is the standard of evidence, we are in trouble because many people are going to be using it from here on out. If we believe this crap, we can't believe this. And we can't allow our government to believe it because they will use this against us. So even if you are watching this and you are super ultra pro-Israel, you cannot be okay with that as a standard of evidence because it will be used against you at some point. So that is one of the hospitals. That's Al-Shifa. Now Al-Quds, which is the second largest hospital in the northern Gaza Strip. Al-Shifa is the largest hospital in the whole area. Al-Quds, the BBC reports that fighting also took place Monday at a second major hospital in northern Gaza, Al-Quds, which has stopped functioning. So this hospital is no longer functioning at all. The other hospital, Shifa, is on its last leg. Al-Quds is done. It's done. The Palestinian Red Crescent said the hospital was surrounded by heavy gunfire and a convoy sent to evacuate patients and staff had been unable to reach it. Israel says it has killed approximately 21 terrorists at Al-Quds in return fire after fighters shot from the hospital entrance, and it released footage it said showed a group of men at the hospital gate, one of whom appeared to be carrying a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. So let's watch this video. So they're claiming that this is the hospital entrance and which I believe it is. And here's a guy going in. Now, at this point, so they're saying, see, this is what they're trying to tell us with this. Because I believe that looks genuine to me. That looks like a guy with a grenade launcher, I'm sure, going into that hospital. What we know, though, is that hospital is no longer functioning and it has been mostly evacuated. There are still people trying to get out of that hospital. But, they're using this and saying, well, this is why we have to target the hospitals. Well, they already targeted this hospital. So this hospital's already gone down. So if you are Hamas and you're trying to fight the IDF, you're going to go where the IDF goes. The IDF says we're going where Hamas goes. Hamas would say we're going where the IDF goes. So if the IDF starts showing up at hospitals and starting shelling hospitals, well, Hamas, their whole reason for being is what they claim is that they are protecting the Palestinian citizens, that they're essentially their military to protect them. Well, what good is your military if they aren't going to protect you, right? So if that is what they're truly claiming to be, then wouldn't they need to show up to the hospital to protect the people if the IDF is there shelling the hospital? It goes both ways, right? So when IDF says, well, Hamas is there, so that's why we're there. And then Hamas can say, well, IDF is there, and that's why we're there. I mean, who knows who showed up first? But they shouldn't, none of them should be at the hospital. They all need to be getting away from the hospital. And even if Hamas is at the hospital, Israel, the IDF could back away from the hospital, surround it and wait and flush those guys out in some other way. Come up with a creative way to flush them out. You don't need to actually bomb and shell the hospital. There's plenty of ways to do this. And don't sit there and try to say, no, there is no way. What would you do? The Hamas fighters are in there. Do we have this standard for the FBI or the police? If the bad guys, if terrorists came to America and took over a hospital, do we say that it's okay for the military, for the National Guard to go and bomb the hospital, or the FBI to bomb the hospital, or the police to just indiscriminately shoot at the hospital, regardless of all the civilians inside? Do we say that that is an okay standard? We don't actually operate on that standard for anything other than war. It's a very interesting mentality. Something about war makes it suddenly okay for civilians to die. We don't have this mentality for any other type of chasing bad guys. We could be chasing terrorists inside the United States. We don't believe it's okay to kill civilians in the process. We could be chasing a serial killer who has committed horrific crimes against numerous people, and we still don't think it's okay to kill civilians to get to them. But when it comes to warfare, something happens and a piece of humanity gets turned off, and we kind of feel like, well, but it's war, so it's okay. Here's another instance that another hospital that is being shelled, the Rantisi Specialized Hospital for Children and the nearby Al-Nasser Hospital in the northern Gaza city were evacuated on Friday, save for a handful of patients and staff. The IDF released to the BBC details of phone conversations between an official at Rantisi and a senior officer in the IDF in which they discussed arrangements to get ambulances to evacuate patients. So the IDF gave this telephone call to the BBC and said, see what we're doing. We are trying to evacuate the civilians. Here's our evidence. We're talking to a Rantisi senior officer, a Rantisi official. And what they said was go outside with your hands up and make sure you're waving white flags so we know that you're the civilians, and we will get you to safety. So he said, according to the call, he twice told the hospital official to make sure civilians were carrying something white to show they were not combatants. They will go out, quote, the hospital official said, they will all go out with their hands in the air. Perfect, said the Israeli. And then watch this video. This is what happened.
حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل اللهم أرنا فيهم عجائب قدرتك يا رب يا رب تلطف فينا يا رب حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل يا رب لطفك يا رب فينا.
So there they were trying to evacuate. They were holding their hands up in the air. They were waving the white flag, and they ended up getting shot at. Now, the video has been verified by BBC. They do say they verified the location, that is that hospital, that is the group of people that was discussed, but they cannot verify who was shooting at them. Israel says, well, Hamas does it. Hamas shoots at the people in order to keep them inside of the hospitals. But the people that are working at the hospitals say that's not true. It's actually the IDF. They're shelling at us. They're targeting us. They're shelling, and they say it's the IDF. So you could trust the IDF and them saying, no, it's Hamas doing it. Or you could trust the people, the civilians who are waving those white flags, the people who are not Hamas, the men, the women, the children who are just trying to get to safety, and they're saying it's the IDF. And they're trusting the IDF. They did what the IDF said. They are trusting the IDF, and they are doing what they're told. And they're trying to get to safety, and yet they're being shot at, and they're kept inside of this hospital. Why would that be done? Well, probably miscommunication. Who knows? One official says, yeah, come out with your hands up and wave the white flag, and others don't get the message, and they just start shooting. I don't know what the battlefield is like there right now with the IDF, but I would imagine there's clearly a lack of communication. I say that because I don't want to believe the other option. I don't want to believe the alternative, which is that monsters are just shooting at these people. I just would rather believe that it's miscommunication, and that's what I would think is most likely. Okay, let's go through the video. This is the IDF put out another video, quote unquote, proving that hospitals are where Hamas is hiding. So this is why they're bombing and shelling the hospitals. This is why they're targeting the hospitals. Don't be so shocked that it's hospitals. They're going to give us the reason why, they say. So let's go ahead and go through this video. This is IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari walking through one of Hamas's subterranean terrorist tunnels, only to exit in Gaza's Rantisi hospital on the other side. And they claim that inside these tunnels, Hamas terrorists hide, operate, and hold Israeli hostages against their will. So let's go ahead and watch this video.
I'm here in Gaza City. We are here next to a house of a terrorist. This is one of the senior terrorists who is the head of the operational naval operations that led the raids into Israel. His house is right next to a school. His house is 200 yards from the hospital of Rantisi. Next to his house, there is a tunnel.
Okay. So here they're trying to show the tunnel. So they're saying that that house belongs to this big leader. Next to his house is a school. I mean, that's typical. People live in neighborhoods.
Now I want to show you.
Now, before we go on to what he's showing you, I want you to look at that photograph real closely while I'm talking to you about this. But he's claiming, trust us, this house belongs to this leader. Next to the leader's house is a school. Well, the house was still standing. They could target the house. They have the ability to target just the house and not the school. He says that the hospital is 200 meters away. Okay, so why are you targeting the hospital when the house is 200 meters away? That's quite a distance. You could get to the house. You don't have to get to the hospital. They also showed a tunnel. The tunnel is not near the hospital. The hospital is, again, further away. So why, once again, would you target the hospital? You would target the tunnel, it seems, or the guy's house. So now he's standing here and he's going to show us a tunnel, he says. So here's what he says.
An operational tunnel. The tunnel is built with electricity. We first saw the solar panels, then the electricity goes here, and it goes down directly to the tunnel. Now you can see the tunnel. You can see the tunnel.
Do you know what needs electricity? Elevators. This is an elevator shaft. So he's saying this tunnel, look at this electricity that goes to this tunnel, and look at this tunnel.
The tunnel is let down more than 20 meters down. The rowboat
20 meters down.
A door that is bulletproof. It's explosives proof. So it looks like a hard evidence, a clear evidence that the hospital direction is connected. This is a cover tunnel.
Well,
it's part of the same floor, and it slides down here. So it's a cover tunnel, so nobody can find it. This is Rantisi.
Oh, it's okay. So the tunnel, that's an elevator shaft. He says, and there's metal doors down there. I mean, the last time I rode in an elevator, it had metal doors. I suppose that maybe are bulletproof or explosive proof because they're big, heavy metal doors. They're not made out of wood, that's for sure. Let's look at this. This is the evidence that this is actually an elevator shaft. We got a couple of things here. Do we think we have a tweet and an image? Do we have these? I don't know if we, yeah. So here's this person says, I used to work at a company that produced and installed elevators. So I know one when I see one. The electrical box contains a 3-phase inverter for elevator motors. I used to assemble this exact kind of box. In the elevator shaft, you could clearly see the rails and the flat cable. Right, so there's cables. He's saying, oh, look, it's the electricity that's going down into this tunnel, and they're using this electricity, and really this is just an elevator shaft, and this is like the service door to this elevator shaft. Here's another image that I just pulled randomly off the internet. I did a Google search for elevator shaft maintenance, and this is what it looks just like it. This is just a random picture I got off the internet in a 10-second search. So Hamas tunnel, elevator shaft for a hospital. I don't know. You be the judge. You be the judge on that. All right, let's keep going with this video. Can't hear it.
This is Rantisi Hospital.
Okay.
And this is the place where I showed you the tunnel. I want you to see.
Okay, so, and that's the other tunnel. That's the other tunnel. So just to be clear, what he's showing us was the first tunnel. So when he's saying there's the hospital over there and there's the tunnel I showed you, not the elevator shaft tunnel. We're talking about the first tunnel that he said was next to that guy's house.
The hospital. Hamas
200
used this
meters
hospital.
Away.
Tonight we have entered into this building. I will show you the evidence. Let's enter into the hospital. We're now entering into
Okay, so just to be clear, we did not go down the tunnel, okay? So remember that, because the way they edit this is very clever. They show us the tunnels, and then they show us the hospital, and now they say, now let's go into the hospital. But they did not go down the tunnel.
Area of the hospital where we had found the evidence. This operation was conducted by Israeli Special Unit, the Israeli Navy SEALs. This is still an operation that is conducting, and I'm showing you the first evidence to see.
Okay. And he said, I might have been talking
We
over
are
it,
now,
but he said,
we are now in the area of the basement of the hospital.
oh, no. Okay, he's saying it now. So we're just in the basement of the hospital. This is not an underground tunnel way below 200, 20 meters or whatever below that. This is the basement. Many buildings have basements. Lots of buildings have basements. Hospitals have basements. So he's just showing us the basement. This is not a Hamas tunnel. So remember
I want to show you a
because he's
room
told us.
where we found all the gear, the operational gear of Hamas. Hamas is using hospitals, like we showed the evidence in Shifa Hospital. In other hospitals, we are now seeing it in live in Rantisi Hospital. An operation still conducting right now. Look at what Hamas is holding inside the hospital. I want you to understand, this kind of gear is a gear for a major fight.
I mean, even I don't think that looks like gear for a major fight. I mean, look, this is very dangerous gear. You've got grenades there. You have machine guns, right? I mean, you've got like all of these things, automatic rifles, I guess, or I don't know. I can't see. Or grenades, but this doesn't look like a lot. And they've gathered them all in one spot. So it wasn't like they went down there and they found the cache of weapons and they're live streaming this to us. They've clearly gathered the laptops and the weapons and stuck them in one spot. And so that makes it suspicious because it's unclear. Did they put weapons there? Did they plant these weapons? IDF soldiers could have brought these weapons in from outside that they found in the battlefield as they've been fighting Hamas, and they could have gathered them up and just carried them in here. This is enough for a couple people to carry, and to stick them in a staged area like this. It would have been much better if they walked through the tunnel without it, let us see for the first time this supposed tunnel. It's not the tunnel, it's the basement of the hospital. And then open up the door and we saw the cache of weapons, or we just see weapons strewn out all over the place. But instead, this is a gathered, this could be staged. It might not be staged. It's possible that they found these weapons and they put them all in this area just to show us how many weapons they had down there. But it also could be completely staged, and that's the problem with this video. And he's in the basement that is clearly being used by the hospital plenty of buildings use their basements. They have church buildings use their basements, and that's where they do Sunday school. Basements are utilized. They're not often just storage and dark dungeons where spiders grow and live. They're oftentimes used for actual living purposes. Many people have living basements.
These are explosives. These are vests with explosives. Yeah, it's a body vest for terrorists to explode on forces. Among hospitals, among patients, we have hand grenades, Kalashnikovs, and then we have the RPGs. People shooting RPGs from hospitals. This is Hamas, firing RPGs for hospitals. The world has to understand who is Israel fighting against. We are now in the basement, and in this basement we found a motorcycle. They were all used in the massacre of the 7th of October.
How do we know? So he's found one motorcycle, and he says this motorcycle was used in the October 7th attack, or maybe a doctor rides a motorcycle to work. Plenty of people ride bikes, and they're not terrorists.
They even have bullets in this motorcycle. So they came back from the massacre on the 7th of October into Rantisi Hospital with hostages on a motorcycle. We're still researching this.
And we don't know what that is.
We find the chair, a woman, clothes, and a rope. A rope next to the legs. And look above this.
That didn't look like a rope. That was like a string. And there's women's clothes, could be scrubs, a nurse's scrubs.
Look above it. It's a baby bottle. It's a baby bottle in the basement.
Well, because there were also children's it was clearly an area used for childcare, or a place where they entertained children that were getting treatment. I mean, we saw that this was clearly decorated for children. There are babies also in hospitals and toddlers who use bottles.
Above a World Health Organization sign. This is a suspicion for an area where hostages were being held. We're now looking at an infrastructure. You don't need to build something improvisedly in a hospital in the basement. Unless you want to hold someone in the basement, you don't want anyone to see him. Again, we're in the same basement, and here we see diapers, and we see, I don't know, maybe something, we see diapers.
Yeah, because there's
I want you to
babies
see
in a
this room.
hospital.
It's in the basement of the hospital. We can see this area
not a
is
tunnel.
a closed area from the rest of the hospital. We can see the ventilation air that was done improvisedly to this area.
No, maybe not improvisedly, but maybe because Gaza doesn't have a lot of money, and so their hospitals are not the most sophisticated. And basements, have you ever been to somebody's basement, an unfinished basement in their house that they plan to finish? And when they do finish it, do you notice that sometimes there's a lot of exposed vents and it doesn't look like the rest of the house because it's the basement? That's, you know, he's pointing these things out and trying to say to you, this is evidence, and this is not evidence. This is just a basement of an abandoned hospital. If we would have walked through it and said, well, this clearly used to be used for where they had children playing. There was decorations and nice, you know, green paint on the walls and pictures on the walls. So clearly children were here at one point in this abandoned hospital that's been shelled and bombed. And so now we find random belongings that people didn't have time to grab as they were running from gunfire and bombs. I mean, this is, or you could say, well, no, this was a Hamas headquarters where they were holding hostages, and
we can
leave
see
it because I say so.
infrastructures
Yeah,
that
keep
was
going.
built in here. Toilets, shower, a small kitchen will provide the terrorists their needs. Also conduct a hideout where terrorists take hostages and hide out. And I will show you now the evidence. You're now entering into the room where we suspect the hostages were being held. I want you to look at this room. People are putting curtains with nothing above, just wall. No reason to put here a curtain unless you want to film hostages and deliver movies. And now we'll show you more evidence.
Okay.
In this
Okay, but I would like to see, now if he showed me a movie with the hostage sitting in front of that curtain, that's one thing.
room,
Okay, so maybe he will.
there is a list. This list, in Arabic, this list says we are in an operation. The operation against Israel started in the 7th of October. This is a Guardian list where every terrorist writes his name and every terrorist has his own shift guarding the...
It's probably the nurse's shift. He's like, in Arabic, a list with shifts inside of a hospital. Who else would need to take shifts inside of a hospital?
people that were here. I'm here in Gaza City.
So that's it. So is that it? That's it. That's it. So we never got a video of a hostage in front of the curtain where he says, look, there's this curtain and hostages were here, and then why would you put a curtain in front of an ugly wall? Why would you do that? And what clearly looked like a nice sitting room with nice furniture. Why would you put that curtain there in front of that ugly blank wall unless you're going to film hostages? Or maybe you just want to cover the ugly blank wall. I mean, this is the stuff that we're getting out of the IDF as evidence in order to get us to go along with the fact that civilians are being targeted and being killed inside of hospitals. That these are crimes against... These are war crimes. The Geneva Conventions made this very clear, that you cannot be targeting hospitals. You cannot be targeting civilians, people inside of hospitals. It's very clear. Article 14 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, hospital and safety zones may be established for wounded, sick, and aged children under 15, expectant mothers, and mothers of children under 7. So they have to have safety zones for hospitals. Civilian hospital, Article 18, civilian hospitals and their staff are to be protected. So these are, this is what they have to do, and yet they're targeting these hospitals, they're targeting these medical professionals, and they're saying, but believe us, because we've got this 3D illustration and some red outlines on a map of where we're telling you, we swear to you, there's Hamas headquarters down there. And then they show us underneath the hospital, and what do they show us? They show us clearly a basement of a hospital and an elevator shaft. This is how I'm it's just I mean, I'm at a loss for words on this because it's so outrageous. It's so unbelievable. I mean, I cannot believe they actually put this out there for people to gobble up, and more so, I can't believe people gobble this up. I mean, it's just so obviously fake. It's obviously lies. It's obviously. I mean, we saw a lot of the stuff that came out of the Russia-Ukraine war. We've seen uh, people go into buildings and fighting and stuff that was very real. This is not real. This looks very staged. This is just take our word for it. Trust me, bro. Right? I mean, this is, and that makes the tragedy of what is happening to the Gazan people even worse. This type of fakery makes the tragedy of the children dying, of the sick dying, of the civilians being targeted, of the thousands of children who have been killed, and even thousands more who have been maimed, and the thousands more who are still buried alive under the rubble. This type of fakery is a mockery to those people who are being killed. And it's even worse that people are believing it when it's just so obviously fake. It's mind-blowing, but Hamas did issue a statement. We just want to get this one out for you real quick here. They said the allegations about Hamas using hospitals and civilians as human shields is nothing more than a bid to deny the facts and provide European cover for the Israeli occupation to commit more crimes against children and defenseless civilians. We strongly reject and denounce this attempt by European Union foreign policy official Borrell to distort the facts by pushing a false narrative that Hamas is using hospitals and civilians as human shields. We consider these remarks an EU cover for the Zionist occupation to commit more massacres against children and defenseless civilians, and we call on Borrell to immediately retract his shameful and inhumane comments. These serious statements ignore all the footage, testimonies, facts, and international reports confirming the truth that the Israeli army has willfully killed more than 11,000 people so far, the vast majority of whom were women and children. Civilians are being targeted, including in their homes and at shelter centers, schools, and internationally protected hospitals, with the aim of terrorizing and forcibly displacing them from their lands in a genocidal crime broadcast live in front of global media, Islamic resistance movement, Hamas. So let's get to the why before we move on. Why would Israel target the hospitals if this is not true, if they've made it up, if what the evidence that they've tried to show us is clearly not good enough? That's not real evidence. Maybe they're not lying, but it's not good enough evidence for people to actually believe it, at least anybody with any eyeballs and common sense. Why would they do it then? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the ultimate plan has always been to clear the Gazans and to move them into smaller and smaller regions and take more and more of the land. People want to be able to move back to the northern strip. They want to be able to go to the main city. The city inside of the Gaza Strip was Gaza City, a very populated city. That is now under attack. These are the hospitals that are under attack. The schools have been under attack. Well, if you don't want people to come back, then you bomb the infrastructure. You get rid of the infrastructure. You don't allow them to return because you say you cannot. There's nothing for you to return to because there are no hospitals. And you would at least need hospitals if you're going to be returning to that area. The kids need schools, and there are no schools. There's no infrastructure for you. The water tanks have been blown up. So you blow up the infrastructure to make it impossible to where if the people went back, that in and of itself is a humanitarian crisis. So you just get rid of everything and say there's nothing to return to. It's not just your home that was damaged. It's not just a few buildings of the Hamas terrorists where they lived, their homes, which we saw perfectly intact. Like they couldn't have bombed that as they were targeting all the schools and the hospitals. And yet he's standing right there. No, he says he knows exactly who lives in that house. And yet that house was still standing. Somebody explain that. Why is that house still standing? And other buildings, schools, churches, and hospitals and medical facilities, and ambulances, and why are those blown up when you can just get them when they're laying in their beds if you know where they live? Most of the leaders we've been seeing on TV anyway, doing interviews, sitting in Qatar or Lebanon or wherever they are, not in Gaza. So if you know where these people are, why don't you go after them rather than all the innocent civilians? That is what's not adding up. That's not what's making sense. And those are the types of things we have to question. All right, guys, let me tell you about Field of Greens. You guys know that I do love this stuff. It's how I get all my energy throughout the day, keep my mind sharp, keep myself at the top of my game. This is, you got to get all your fruits and veggies, and Field of Greens is going to help you do that. It is a fine powder made from dehydrated whole fruits and vegetables that are carefully selected to give you the most nutrients in your diet possible. So when you just take a scoop of this powder and you mix it into your ice water, and it actually does taste good. It's like a tea. Like green tea with lemon I like the lemon lime, so that's what it tastes like. This is how you're going to get all of your fruits and vegetables into your diet without having to actually eat all the fruits and vegetables, because it's a lot. And most people don't. Everybody's snacking on other stuff. So Field of Greens is really amazing. It's going to give you those nutrients. And when you get those nutrients, you will have more energy. You will feel better. Your health will improve. Your stats, when you go to the doctor, they'll be like, wow, you're doing so well. What have you been up to? Well, you've been taking your Field of Greens, you've been getting all of your fruits and veggies, and that is important. So grab Field of Greens. You can get 15% off your first order by going to fieldofgreens.com and using the promo code Kim. That is fieldofgreens.com, promo code Kim, and you will get 15% off your first order. I really do like this stuff. Genuinely, I do. It does taste good. I like that it's not a gloopy, green, thick drink. It's light and tea-like, and I enjoy it. So, and it really does work. Fieldofgreens.com, promo code Kim, 15% off your first order. So Netanyahu sat down with CNN for his first interview since October 7th. At least that's what they said. I don't know if he's been interviewed by other outlets or if this was just his first interview with CNN or his first American interview, not sure. But he did sit down with Dana Bash. And as I was sitting there watching TV, getting ready for this interview, I was thinking, oh man, Dana Bash, she's been... I felt like she's been biased throughout this conflict on the side of Israel. And so I expected a softball interview. She actually did a really good job. And she actually asked tough questions, and she held Netanyahu's feet to the fire a bit. I do want to play some of it for you because he gives away his hand really in this interview. He basically talks about whether or not they're helping people actually evacuate hospitals, talks about, claims that that Israel's fighting this war. It's kind of what we're hearing from Zelensky. We're fighting this war, but for all of you. This is for humanity. This is for everybody. So support us in this war because it's not just us, it's you. He talks about why they're targeting even kids' beds. Says that they've got Hamas has tunnels under the kids' beds. He talks about whether or not he would actually agree to a ceasefire for hostages. A lot of people are asking, look, a lot of people say if Hamas would just turn over the hostages, this would just end. And Netanyahu talks about that, and it turns out that would not be the case. It would not end. They've got a plan, and their plan is to destroy Hamas, whether they get those hostages back or not. And what will happen to Gaza after Hamas is defeated? Netanyahu gives a very, very, very telling answer. So let's get started with this clip. Here it is.
Just to be clear, sir, Israel will help these civilians who are quite sick and inside these hospitals come out, not just in Al-Shifa, but there are other hospitals where this is happening.
Yes. Yes, we're telling them to leave. And in
Telling
fact,
them
we're
or helping
creating,
them?
Donna, helping them by creating safe corridors. So we have designated routes to a safe zone south of Gaza City where there's no fighting. And we're telling them, go ahead, move. And by the way, 70,000 have moved 3 days ago. I think 50,000 moved yesterday. More will move today. We want all the civilians to be removed out of harm's way. And Hamas is doing everything in their power to keep them in harm's way.
Do you believe that they're...
Okay. So he's saying, so before we move on here, he's saying there, when she says, are you helping them get out of the hospitals? Or are you just telling them to? And he's like, no, we're helping because we've established these safe zone corridors. Those safe zone corridors are just roads that they're using to funnel thousands, as he mentioned, 50, 70,000 people to get from the north to the south. That's not actual routes getting out of the hospitals that are under fire. She's asking him, are you helping these people get out of the hospitals and then get to safety? And he's like, well, we've set up these safe corridors. But he's talking about, yeah, safe corridors on the other side of town. If you could get out of the hospital and get yourself to that safe corridor. So he's not answering that question because the answer is no. They're not helping the civilians actually get out. We already saw it. They said, come out with your hands up and wave the white flag and we'll let you walk around. And they didn't. They instead started shelling them. So they're not. So the answer is no. They're not actually helping them get out of the hospital. They're telling them to get out and then get yourself to the safe corridor. And from there, if you could get there, may the odds be ever in your favor, then you can get yourself to the southern part of the
There are
Strip.
hostages below that hospital, Israeli or American hostages?
Well, I'm not going to go into the intelligence picture we have, but there's been this vicious thing. They take hostages. Imagine a baby is held hostage. Who takes a baby hostage? Yeah, I don't know if you have children, Donna. I'm sure your camera crew has, and we all have children. What is this taking children hostages, threatening to kill them? I mean, this is savagery of the highest order. So obviously, we're doing everything in our power to achieve two things. One, destroy Hamas, because without it, none of us have a future. And it's not only our war, it's your war too. It's the battle of civilization against barbarism. And if we don't win here, this scourge will pass. The Middle East will pass to other places.
Yeah.
Middle East will fall. Europe is next. You'll be next. But it's the first goal is to destroy Hamas, and the second goal is to bring back our hostages. We're trying to do both.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I agree. Who does take a baby as a hostage? I mean, it is, the hostages absolutely need to be released. All of the hostages need to be released. Reports are many of them have already been killed from the bombardment, but let the hostages go. The reason why Hamas doesn't want to let them go is because they're leverage at this point. They're using, now these would be human shields legitimately, right? You're using a hostage and you're saying, if you bomb us, you might be killing your own. That would be, I think, maybe a war tactic. He's absolutely right. It is sick to take a child as a hostage. It's sick to take any of these hostages. But it's also sick to be killing children, and that is what Israel's doing. So he's saying, who takes a baby and threatens to kill them? Well, who actually kills babies? Who's actually killing babies? Hamas did on October 7th, and then Israel comes back and kills 10 times more. It is already wrong to have your child killed, and then you go and take revenge by killing their child, which is wrong to seek revenge in that way. But it's even more wrong to then say, oh, I'm not just going to kill your one child to avenge my child who you killed, but I'm going to kill all 10 of your children at the same time.
Israel is not Hamas, and the United States also makes very clear that democracies have to do better. The Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, said that far too many Palestinian civilians have been killed. What is your response to that?
I think any civilian loss is a tragedy, and the blame should be placed squarely on Hamas because it prevents them from leaving the war zone, sometimes at gunpoint. It fired on the safe zone and the safe corridor that we enacted the other day to prevent Palestinians from leaving harm's way. It puts rockets inside schools, hospitals. It has tunnels below children's beds. The one example I could give you is this.
Okay, so he says
savages,
there,
they perpetrated the worst harm.
He says there, he says it's not our fault that we're bombing all of these areas that they bomb because Hamas puts tunnels, they put rockets in schools and in hospitals, and they dig tunnels. They have tunnels under kids' beds. So he's there telling you, I'm going to kill kids, but it's not my fault because Hamas has tunnels under their beds. I don't care what Hamas is storing under their beds. I don't care if there's rockets underneath that kid's bed, as if they're going to shoot the kid with the rocket that they fire off. There is no reason to kill a kid. There's never a reason to kill a kid and say, well, too bad, kid. Just turns out that there was a tunnel under your bed. I mean, like a boogeyman under your bed. And so we had to kill you. Sorry, we had to take out the boogeyman. I mean, it's just, but there he is. He's saying it. He's saying, and he's justifying the killing of people who are in hospitals, who are in schools, and even just kids sleeping in their own beds.
The one example I could give you is this. Look, these savages, they perpetrated the worst horrors on Jews since the Holocaust. The German Chancellor Scholz called them the new Nazis. Well, look at the old Nazis. The Allies were attacked by Hitler, and so they invaded France and then Germany. And when they did that, they went into the cities. They had to fight the German army that was often embedded in civilian in the cities, in civilian neighborhoods. And many civilians were killed. So who was the blame laid on to? Did they say, well, the Nazis are the Allies are wrong, the Allies should stop fighting? Or they said, look, use force as judiciously as you can, But don't give the Nazis any refuge. Defeat the Nazis, which is what we're doing.
Prime Minister,
We're using force in the most judicious way, but we have to defeat these new Nazis, and we will, for our sake, for your sake too.
Well, thank you very much doing it for us. I mean, he keeps going back to that. And this is something Zelensky did over and over as well, which is we're fighting this for you. This is for you. This isn't just us. This isn't our battle for nationalism in both cases. This is for you. We're doing it for you. First of all, Hamas, to compare Hamas to the Nazi invasion, there's been this rhetoric of Hamas has committed the worst horrors against Jews since the Holocaust. The Holocaust was millions of people. Hamas on October 7th, it was an atrocious attack. It was terrible and it never should have happened. But it was over 1,000 people, just over 1,000 people, 1,300 people, not millions of people. To then compare it to Nazi invasions, where the Nazis were a very powerful, sophisticated military, an innovative military, and they were able to go and invade countries and take over regions. Hamas does not have that capability whatsoever. Hamas is no real threat to take over Israel or anywhere else in the world. They just don't have the ability to do that. There's no ability for Hamas to commit a genocide, for example. You would need to have infrastructure. You'd have to have backing of other countries. You'd have to have sophisticated militaries, large militaries. That is something that Hamas does not have. These are fighters that are using hang gliders and Toyota pickups or whatever. I don't know if it was whatever brand of pickup. And they're using homemade weapons, homemade rockets, and recycled weapons from Soviet era. So they're not sophisticated. They don't have the ability to commit anything. What they did was as bad as they're ever going to get. And that was mainly because of a really piss poor response by the IDF. Had the IDF not been on the other side of the country, had the IDF been nearby, they would have never been able to get away with what they got away with and for how long they got away with it. That was largely a security failure of the IDF, an Israeli security failure. Hamas doesn't have the capability to do that much damage. And because they were left to do whatever they could do in 7 or 8 hours, and then there's a lot of questions on exactly how people died, just like Netanyahu sitting there saying, well, civilians get killed. And, we don't turn to the allies and say, well, you're at fault for killing these civilians. Same thing happened when the IDF finally did show up. We don't know how many casualties were from the crossfire or from Hamas just coming in and massacring people before the IDF ever got there. It's unclear. I would imagine, though, that there were deaths from both sides. I can't imagine that all of the deaths were very specifically from Hamas. Of course, nobody would have died had Hamas not gone out there and started the massacres on October 7th. That is not when this conflict started. It did not start October 7th. But on that day, it started with Hamas. And none of those people would be dead if Hamas didn't break out of Gaza and do what they did. Just like none of the Gazan people, none of these children, these thousands, these 11,000 people would be dead if Israel took different tactics rather than bombing and indiscriminately shelling and indiscriminately bombing full neighborhoods, flattening entire neighborhoods, saying that they're looking for Hamas. Those are also on Israel. They're not willing to say that. But look, after World War II, there were a round of Geneva Conventions. Article 4 of Geneva Conventions were put into place, and that was specifically to protect persons, civilians. It's the Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in the time of war. This was adopted August 12th of 1949. This was right after World War II. Civilians in areas of armed conflict and occupied territories are protected by the 159 articles of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Such provisions include civilians are to be protected from murder, torture, or brutality, and from discrimination on the basis of race, nationality, religion, or political opinion. And what we're hearing is, well, they support Hamas, so it's okay to kill them. Well, no, not according to the Geneva Convention. You are protected even from even with your political opinion. You support Hamas, that doesn't mean you are Hamas. It doesn't mean you committed the atrocities. It doesn't mean you're a fighter, and that doesn't mean you should be killed. Also says civilian hospitals and their staff are to be protected. That is not what's happening. Also says in the Geneva Conventions, they are not to be subjected to collective punishment or deportation. We're seeing both of that. We're seeing massive waves of hundreds of thousands of people, an attempt to get 1.3 million people to move from an entire region to another part, deporting them essentially from the northern Gaza Strip to the southern Gaza Strip. So the Geneva Conventions were actually in place as a response to the atrocities that were committed during World War II. And all of these countries got together and agreed that it was overkill, literally, in many of the situations. And so they got together and said, you know what, crimes were committed, civilians were not protected, and we need to do better. We need to evolve. We need to become more enlightened, and warfare can become better to where we protect civilians. And many countries have adopted better warfare tactics that do protect large numbers of civilians. But Israel's going World War II style, and that is what we're seeing. We're seeing them leveling entire neighborhoods, and now they're wanting to go after the entire northern strip of Gaza. This is like World War II style warfare, and that's why he's pointing at World War II and saying, "See, you did it. So what's the problem? Why can't we? It's not that big of a deal. Why did you didn't point at the Nazis and say they were the criminals? So why are you pointing at us?" Well, because the Nazis, the Nazis were not the ones inside the concentration camps. They were the ones guarding the concentration camp. Just like the Gazans are the ones inside of the region they cannot get out of. And the Israelis are the ones guarding the camp, the big prison camp that these Gazans are trapped inside of. So, but anyway, let's keep going with his interview here. He says
Prime
some
Minister
more things.
Netanyahu, one of the questions right now is, when it comes to hostages, is whether there can be a negotiation that works towards a deal to free large groups of hostages in exchange for a sustained days-long pause in fighting. Is that acceptable to you? And if so, how long of a pause would Israel be willing to allow?
I said that we're going to pursue the battle to destroy Hamas to its end. But I also said that the only ceasefire that we would consider is one in which we have our hostages released. And that remains true. Doesn't mean that we can't give humanitarian pause for a few hours in a place, a specific time and place where we want to have a humanitarian corridor and have the people leave safely. We've done that, and hundreds of thousands have left the fighting zone.
So how long of a pause would you be
fashion.
willing to support?
Well, so far we've dealt with a few hours. If you're talking about a ceasefire, well, I'm not going to get into that.
No, I'm not talking about a ceasefire. Just a longer pause, days, for example.
That's not a pause. If you're talking about stopping the fighting, that's exactly what Hamas wants. Hamas wants an endless series of pauses that basically dissipate the battle against them. It's like the Germans after Normandy. They say, okay, let's have a ceasefire. You guys, hold off. Let us replenish our supplies. Let us get out of our terror tunnels. Let us rearm ourselves and so on. Obviously, we're not going to do that.
The U.S. says that you need
in order to have a ceasefire of any ceasefire in the entire area, that will require the release of our hostages.
The U.S. says that you need an extended pause in order to get the hostages out. Do you not believe that as well?
Oh, well, we don't disagree with that. Well, we need to get our hostages out.
Okay. So in this clip, this is very muddled. She couldn't really get an answer out of him on whether or not he would agree to a ceasefire in exchange for the hostages. He's essentially saying, because a lot of people have said, look, if you just give up the hostages, this whole thing ends. Netanyahu is essentially saying there, no, it doesn't. He says, we are in it to destroy Hamas. We will, he says, a ceasefire. So then he starts to muddle the definitions. And he says a ceasefire is when you stop fighting throughout the entire region for a period of time. He doesn't specify how long that period is. It's not for forever. It's just a period of time. Could be hours, could be days, could be longer, right? But he's saying that's a ceasefire. There are some pauses that they claim that they're doing in certain areas in order to evacuate civilians. That's what he's considering a pause. Dana Bash clearly has different definitions of these things, and so they're kind of getting lost in the definition, the kind of the word game here. But what Netanyahu has clearly said is he's in it to defeat Hamas. He will consider a temporary ceasefire for a period of time, meaning all fighting stops for a few hours. He says days. He kind of scoffed at the idea of days because he thought, oh, well, then Hamas is going to rebuild. Hamas is going to, this is what they want. They want us to stop for days so that they can rebuild. And we don't want to do that. We're here to. So he's saying, I would consider a ceasefire to get my hostages back. But again, that ceasefire is not long. So he's basically, so he's not giving Hamas any reason to actually turn over the hostages. That's the problem here with this rhetoric, is that Hamas is hearing, oh, so in exchange for the hostages, we'll get a couple of hours of a ceasefire where you stop firing on Gaza for a couple of hours just to get your hostages back, and then you'll start up again. I mean, that's what they're hearing. So there's no motivation there. Let's keep going.
The U.S. also says that any post-war plan for Gaza must include Palestinian-led governance and Gaza unified with the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. You appeared to reject that yesterday. You said Israel will not accept a, quote, civilian authority there that educates its children to hate Israel. So I just want to be clear. Are you saying that Israel would not accept giving control of Gaza over to the Palestinian Authority after the war?
The first thing we have to do is destroy Hamas, because otherwise they'll do it again and again and again, and they've said so. So we'll destroy Hamas. The second thing we have to understand is that there has to be an overriding and overreaching Israeli military envelope, because we've seen any place that we leave, we just, exit, give it to some other force. Very soon terrorism resurges, so we've achieved nothing. The third thing we have to understand is that a civilian authority has to cooperate in two goals. One is to demilitarize Gaza, and the second is to de-radicalize Gaza. And I have to say that the Palestinian Authority has, unfortunately, failed on both counts. They don't demilitarize the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. We have to do it. We have to go in and fight the terrorists. They don't de-radicalize. They teach our children the hatred of Israel. They do pay for slay. They pay for terrorist murderers and their families. The more Jews they kill, the more they pay. They refuse to this day, 36 days after this savagery, to condemn
so if
what
not the PA,
Hamas
then who?
did on November 7th. Sorry?
If not the PA,
well,
then
there has to be a reconstructed civilian authority. There has to be something else. Otherwise, we're just falling into that same rabbit hole, and we're going to have the same result. Remember, the PA was already in Gaza. When Israel left Gaza, it handed the keys over to the PA. And what happened? Within a very short time, Hamas took over, kicked them out. They weren't willing to fight Hamas. They're still not willing to fight Hamas. So you have to have some kind of authority, civilian Palestinian authority, that is willing to fight the terrorists and educating, and importantly, must educate their children for a future of peace, cooperation, prosperity, cooperation with Israel, not the annihilation of Israel. And so far, that hasn't happened. The burden of proof is on the PA, and they've failed every single count. I say that regrettably, but honestly, we have to be realistic about what we expect. We can't fall back on formulas that failed. We have to succeed, to give Gaza a better future. Let's not bring it to a failed past.
Right.
Let's create a different reality there.
So he's using a lot of nice flowery language to get people to go along with this. Like, oh, it sounds really, really nice. But listen carefully to what he said. He has said, we're not going to allow the Palestinian Authority to come in and be in control of Gaza. The Palestinian Authority is the government in charge of the West Bank. Hamas has been the government in charge of Gaza, and that is strategic. Netanyahu propped up Hamas, funded Hamas, encouraged Hamas, and kept the Palestinian Authority out in order to keep Palestine divided. Here's a J-Post article. This was from 2019. Netanyahu, money to Hamas, part of a strategy to keep Palestinians divided. Goes on to say Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defended Israel's regular allowing of Qatari funds to be transferred into Gaza, saying it's part of a broader strategy to keep Hamas and the Palestinian Authority separate, a source in Monday's Likud faction meeting said. So this is what his strategy has been for a very long time, and he's been saying this for the last couple of decades, nearly a couple of decades that Hamas has been in power, that this was a strategy to keep the Palestinians divided so that they couldn't create a Palestinian nation. It's all in an effort to stop the rise of an actual, true two-state solution. And there's Netanyahu saying, all right, fine. We can't have Hamas anymore. Fine. But I don't want the Palestinian Authority in there. It's got to be some other group. What other group? What other group? There's no other group. But he said, oh, no, it's got to be somebody. It cannot be the Palestinian Authority. It can't be the Palestinian Authority. Even though they're already a functioning government in the West Bank, it can't be them. They got to start from scratch, a new government, civilians, but it's got to remain divided from the West Bank to ensure that there isn't a Palestinian nation that rises up. Netanyahu cannot change his stripes. A tiger cannot change his stripes. He's already decided there will not be a Palestinian nation. And he's going to ensure that. That's been his entire ethos as prime minister the last several decades that he's been in power. And he's created this situation. And now he's saying, the ideas of the past didn't work. We've got to change them. And yet he's just reverting to the same old idea in the past. Keep Palestinians divided as a number one strategy to ensure that a Palestinian state never actually rises up. Unbelievable. All right, guys. I am someone who doesn't sleep well at all. And my dog, she's so cute. Her name's Scarlet, and she's a big shepherd, and she's getting older. I'll show you a picture of her sometime. But I turned to CBD because I really wanted to give her some relief. And a lot of people said, oh, you've got to try CBD for your dog. And so that is why I looked into cbdistillery.com. I wanted a natural way to help my dog get some sleep or get some relief from her aches and pains. She's got arthritis. And then, I also thought, well, I've heard a lot of people say that they get really good sleep using CBD. So this is the brand that I trust. It is CB Distillery. They have over 2 million satisfied customers. 90% of customers report that they sleep better with CBD. 81% said CBD helps them with stress. 80% said CBD helps with aches and pains after physical activity. So if you struggle to get a good night's sleep like me, or if you're dealing with too much stress and you need some stress relief, or if you suffer with pain and discomfort, especially after physical exercise, or you've got an older animal who's your best furry friend, then go to the source that I trust, and that is cbdistillery.com. You will get 20% off your order when you enter my name, Kim, at checkout. No prescription required. That is cbdistillery.com, promo code Kim for 20% off your order. Check it out. So Randi Weingarten, she is the president of the American Teachers Union. You probably know her name during COVID because she was a big proponent of keeping those schools locked down, made it very, very difficult for schools to open back up. Well, she says if you're criticizing her regarding those school lockdowns, it's because you're anti-Semitic. Watch this.
And over the past couple of years, you've faced some criticism, and your critics are rather loud and persistent. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that very public criticism?
So first, if it was on the level, it would be different. But what we know about it is an intention to undermine the very institutions that help educate kids, protect democracy and pluralism in this country, and help people have a better shot at the American dream. And so all of us do stupid things. And, I've done stupid things and I've made misjudgments. But how do you actually take someone who from April 2020 tried to reopen schools because we knew it was important, but said they have to be reopened safely so we protect everyone, just like we try to protect everyone from, gun violence, from respiratory issues? How do you lie about me like that? And so what I learned was they'll smear because they're trying to divide and create mistrust and distrust. And we just have to be happy warriors about doing the right things for kids. Does it bother me sometimes? Of course it bothers me. But at the end of the day, I have amazing members. And what's happened is we can't, if I let them bully me, what about every educator? What about every worker? What about every vulnerable student? And the other thing I've come to learn is if you're a member of a minority group, look, there's lots of anti-Semitism. I happen to be married to a rabbi, and I happen to really believe in my faith. And there's a lot of homophobia. And I happen to be the first out lesbian as a labor leader in the country ever. And so this kind of attack of identity, that's all rolled into it too.
Of course. Oh, well, if you're attacking me and criticizing my policies or calling me a hypocrite or a liar, it's because you're anti-Semitic and you're homophobic, not because you actually have a point. She's saying there that from April of 2020, she advocated for schools to open. No, in July of 2020, she actually called the Trump administration's push to reopen schools reckless, callous, and cruel in July of 2020. So she's saying in April of 2020, she was pushing to open schools, but she was then criticizing Donald Trump, saying, you reckless, callous, cruel. And she actually endorsed safety strikes, teachers to go on safety strikes, saying that it wasn't safe for them to reopen schools. She endorsed those strikes. In February of 2021, Lori Lightfoot, the mayor at the time of Chicago, said that they were begging the teachers union to come to the table so that they could figure out a way to reopen schools. And the teachers union was nowhere to be found. They said, we don't even want to talk to you about this. Opening schools is not the right thing to be doing. That was in February of 2021. Yet she's claiming in April of 2020, I was doing everything I could to reopen schools. And if you say otherwise, you're an anti-Semite. This is why nobody takes that. There is such a thing as anti-Semitism. But when it's used constantly as just a shield for any sort of criticism, nobody could take it seriously, and it actually diminishes the actual meaning of it, of something that is actually real at times. But it's used just if you're Jewish and you're being criticized, then the person who's criticizing you is anti-Semitic, even though what they're saying has nothing to do with any of that. In January of 2020, the Chicago Union voted against in-person learning. And the union said it wouldn't relent until the surge in COVID-19 cases subsided or the school district signed an agreement establishing conditions for return. And that was also endorsed by Randi Weingarten, the head of the teachers union. So she was absolutely not about opening schools. She was about keeping them locked down. That was evidenced even in emails that were circulating to the CDC, and there was email evidence of them saying the teachers unions are the ones that are really pushing us, and we've got to do what the teachers union wants. And so she's lying. She's lying right here, and she's saying, why are you targeting me? Why are you criticizing me? Why are you coming at me? Well, it must be because I'm married to a rabbi, I'm Jewish, and I'm a lesbian. My rabbi wife is a woman and I'm a woman, and therefore, you're just anti-Semitic and you're homophobic. You can't make this stuff up. Okay. She's now wanting to run for cover because we now know that the lockdowns, especially for children not going to school, was absolutely disastrous. And the children have not been able to make up for that lost time. They are way behind. It has destroyed not only their education, but their mental health, their physical health. Lockdowns were an absolute disaster for everybody. It ended up not working. The countries that did not implement lockdowns and the areas that did not implement lockdowns did way better than the areas that did. And that is now documented. And history will not be on the side of Randi Weingarten, who was all about the lockdowns, or all of the people who were all about the lockdowns. They did not work. And many of us were very aware that they would not work from the very beginning, that they instead would be a policy that would end up in a much worse outcome. Children are now suffering, and children were not the ones who needed to fear COVID, like the elderly, anyone over 65, had a real serious, concern with COVID, and I think rightfully so. But children, and now the children are going to be paying long-term health and mental and educational consequences, all because Randi Weingarten was all. But don't you dare say it! Don't you dare! Don't you dare, bigot! All right, guys, are you tired of being targeted with phishing emails? I actually deleted, I'm not kidding you today, 17,000 emails. I'm not even kidding. 17,000 emails out of my email inbox. I have a few inboxes, and I got rid of 17,000 today. So all of them were pretty much spam. So if you're fed up with spam cluttering your inbox like I am, and you're concerned about companies like Google or the government spying on your private conversations, then it is time to switch to StartMail. StartMail is a secure alternative to Gmail that lets you send emails like they're in a sealed envelope, making sure your communication stays private and secure. Services like Google collect your data and they use it for targeted ads. Smart Mail is strictly ad-free, and it does not collect or share any data with third parties for advertisement or tracking. Your Start Mail account comes with all of the features you need, including unlimited disposable email addresses to protect your inbox from phishing scams and hacking attempts. So you can switch to Start Mail. It is super easy. If you're worried about your old emails stored on Gmail or Outlook or Yahoo, they've got you covered. SmartMail's hassle-free migration tool lets you move your emails and contacts with just a few clicks, no technical knowledge required. Over the past decade, StartMail has become a trusted name in email privacy, so why wait any longer? Switch to StartMail and experience the peace of mind that comes with a truly secure email service. So sign up today and you will get 50% off your first subscription year. All you got to do is go to startmail.com and join millions of people who are moving away from big tech to secure email providers. That's startmail with a T.com. So startmail.com/Iverson, and you will get 50% off your first year. And that link is down below. All right, guys, that is it for tonight's show. Thank you so much for joining us. We will have another great show again for you tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Really looking forward to seeing you guys again. I love hearing from you. So if you have any questions or comments, please email me, kim@kimiverson.com. And we will see you guys tomorrow night. So have a good one. Bye-bye.